someday you're going to share it with the whole world.
Scientific gamma radiation.
What if one failed experiment turned an ordinary scientist into the most unstoppable monster on Earth? Packed with explosive action, shocking secrets, and emotional twists, Hulk 2003 reveals the tragic origin of Bruce Banner and the incredible power that changes his life forever. Welcome to Kako Film, where we bring you complete movie reviews, hidden facts, and everything you need to know about your favorite movies. Hulk, Hulk, also called The Hulk, is a 2003 American superhero film based on the famous Marvel Comics character created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The movie was directed by Ang Lee and written by John Turman, James Shamus, and Michael France. Eric Bana plays the role of Bruce Banner, while Jennifer Connelly, Sam Elliott, Josh Lucas, and Nick Nolte appear in important supporting roles. The movie tells the origin story of Bruce Banner, a brilliant scientist whose life changes forever after a laboratory accident involving powerful gamma radiation. After the accident, Bruce discovers that whenever he becomes angry, stressed, or emotionally overwhelmed, he transforms into a gigantic green creature known as the Hulk. As the Hulk, he possesses incredible strength and almost unstoppable power, making him one of the most powerful beings on Earth. As Bruce struggles to understand and control his transformation, the United States military begins hunting him, believing he is too dangerous to remain free. At the same time, Bruce is forced to face painful secrets from his childhood and a dangerous confrontation with his biological father, whose past experiments are closely connected to Bruce's incredible powers. Work on the film began as early as 1990, and it spent many years in development before finally reaching the big screen. During that time, several directors and writers became involved with the project, and many different versions of the script were created before Ang Lee joined the production and helped shape the final film. Filming mainly took place in California between March and August 2002, with many scenes being shot around the San Francisco Bay Area. The production used a combination of live action filming, computer generated visual effects, and motion capture technology to bring the Hulk to life in a realistic way. Hulk was released by Universal Pictures on June 20, 2003. The movie earned around $245, $3 million worldwide at the box office, Critics gave the film mixed to positive reviews. Many praised Eric Bana's performance, Ang Lee's unique directing style, the emotional story, and the film's attempt to explore Bruce Banner's inner struggles. However, some viewers felt the movie moved too slowly and believed its running time was longer than necessary. Over the years, Hulk 2003 has gained a stronger appreciation from many fans. It has developed a loyal cult following because it focuses more on Bruce Banner's emotions, family drama, and psychological struggles instead of relying only on action scenes and superhero battles. Many people now consider it a unique and different superhero film compared to others released during that time. A sequel was originally planned and expected to be released in 2005. However, those plans were later changed, and the project was completely reworked into a new reboot called The Incredible Hulk, which was released on June 13, 2008. That film became the second movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe (MCU) and introduced a new version of the Hulk for future Marvel films during the 1960s. Scientist David Banner worked for the government, researching ways to improve human DNA. He believed his experiments could make people stronger and healthier. However, his supervisor, Colonel Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, strictly banned human testing because it was too dangerous. Ignoring the orders, David secretly tested his experiment on himself. Soon afterward, David's wife, Edith, gave birth to their son Bruce Banner. David realized that Bruce had inherited the changes made to his DNA. Fearing that his experiment had affected his son, David desperately searched for a cure. When Colonel Ross discovered David's illegal research, he shut down the entire project. Furious, David tried to take revenge by causing the gamma reactor at Desert Base to explode, believing that Bruce had become dangerous because of the altered DNA. David decided that the only way to stop the problem was to kill his own son. Edith stepped in to protect Bruce, but David accidentally killed her instead. The terrible tragedy deeply traumatized young Bruce, causing him to completely forget the painful memories of his childhood. David was arrested and sent to a mental hospital. 4 year old Bruce was placed into foster care, where he was later adopted by Mrs. Krenzler. Bruce took her family name and grew up believing that his real parents had died many years ago. Years later, Bruce becomes a brilliant scientist working at the Berkeley Laboratory. He is also in a relationship with Betty Ross, who is the daughter of General Ross, although Betty and her father no longer have a close relationship. At the same time, a private military research company called Atheon becomes interested in Bruce's work. Its representative, Glenn Talbot, wants to use Bruce's research on tiny healing machines called nanopeds to create powerful soldiers for military use. Meanwhile, David Banner secretly returns and gets a job as a janitor inside the laboratory so he can quietly watch Bruce and get close to him again. General Ross also begins investigating David's return and becomes worried that Bruce could put Betty in danger. One day, Bruce saves a fellow scientist named Harper during an accident involving a damaged gamma machine called a gammasphere. Bruce is exposed to an enormous amount of gamma radiation but somehow survives. When he wakes up in the hospital, he feels healthier than ever before. Betty is amazed because the radiation destroyed everything else around him. Unknown to both of them, the gamma radiation has merged with Bruce's unusual DNA group, creating something completely new inside him. Not long afterward, David finally introduces himself to Bruce and reveals that he is his real father. He hints that Bruce is different because of the experiments performed years ago. David secretly steals samples of Bruce's DNA and begins testing them on animals to continue his research. As pressure builds around Bruce, his anger becomes harder to control. Eventually, the radiation inside his body reacts to his emotions, transforming him into a gigantic green creature known as the Hulk. In his first transformation, the Hulk destroys much of the laboratory before escaping. The next morning, Betty finds Bruce unconscious in his house. Bruce remembers very little about what happened. Soon after, General Ross questions Bruce about the destruction, while Betty starts investigating David herself to uncover the truth. After many hours of questioning, Ross shuts down Bruce's laboratory and places him under house arrest. That night, David calls Bruce and tells him that he has genetically changed three dogs and sent them to attack Betty. Furious and terrified for Betty's safety, Bruce transforms into the Hulk once again. Before reaching Betty, Glenn Talbot attacks Bruce, causing another transformation. The Hulk easily defeats Talbot and several military police officers before escaping. He reaches Betty's cabin in the forest just in time to save her from the mutated dogs. After defeating them, Bruce returns to his normal human form. The next day, Betty contacts General Ross and the military captures Bruce after sedating him. He is taken back to Desert Base for further study. Ross believes Bruce is following the same dangerous path as his father and thinks he cannot be saved. Betty refuses to give up and convinces her father to let her try to help Bruce. Meanwhile, David performs another dangerous experiment on himself using the nanomeds and the gamma machine. As a result, he gains the strange ability to absorb the energy and physical properties of anything he touches, making him far more powerful than before. Soon afterward, Talbot takes control of the military operation from Ross and forces Betty to leave the base. Wanting to profit from the Hulk's incredible strength, Talbot tries to force Bruce into transforming. When that fails, Bruce is locked inside a powerful isolation chamber. At the same time, David visits Betty and tells her he is willing to surrender to the authorities, but only after speaking to Bruce one final time. Talbot then uses Bruce's forgotten childhood memories to trigger another transformation. Although Bruce becomes the Hulk, Talbot cannot keep him imprisoned. The Hulk easily breaks out of the containment chamber. The military traps the Hulk inside a giant layer of sticky foam, hoping to collect samples from him. However, the Hulk breaks free once again. During the battle, Talbot fires an explosive weapon at the Hulk. The Hulk sends the explosion back toward Talbot, accidentally killing him. General Ross then regains command of the military operation. The Hulk escapes into the desert where he battles tanks, helicopters, and soldiers before making an enormous leap all the way to San Francisco to find Betty. When Betty reaches him, she is able to calm him down, allowing Bruce to return to his human form. Later, Bruce agrees to meet David at a military base while General Ross watches closely. Ross prepares to destroy both of them if necessary. Dade has become obsessed with gaining unlimited power and wants Bruce's abilities for himself so he can destroy anyone who stands against him. When Bruce refuses to help him, David bites into a powerful electrical cable after Ross turns on the electricity. David absorbs an incredible amount of energy, transforming himself into a giant being made of electricity. Bruce transforms into the Hulk, and an enormous battle begins between father and son. The fight eventually reaches a nearby lake where David tries to absorb all of the Hulk's power. Instead of resisting, Bruce allows David to absorb not only his strength but also every painful emotion, every memory, every moment of anger, fear, and suffering that he has carried throughout his life, the overwhelming energy becomes too much for David to control. His body swells into a gigantic green energy mass. Seeing no other choice, General Ross orders a powerful gamma charge bomb to be launched. The explosion destroys David completely, while Bruce is believed to have died in the blast. 1 year later, General Ross continues monitoring Betty while reports of mysterious Hulk sightings begin appearing around the world. Far away in the Amazon rainforest, Bruce is revealed to be alive. He is now working quietly as a doctor in a remote medical camp, hoping to live peacefully. One day, armed soldiers attack the camp and try to steal medical supplies. Bruce calmly warns their leader not to make him angry. When the soldiers ignore the warning, Bruce loses control once again, and the terrifying roar of the Hulk echoes through the jungle. Hulk 2003 assembled one of the most unexpectedly distinguished casts in early superhero cinema, a production whose roster of Oscar winners, Oscar nominees, and acclaimed characters have reflected director Ang Lee's determination to make a comic book film that operated on the dramatic level of serious art house cinema. Written by John Turman, James Shamus, and Michael France, the film stars Eric Bana as Bruce Banner and Hulk, alongside Jennifer Connelly, Sam Elliott, Josh Lucas, and Nick Nolte. Every casting decision reflected Lee's stated ambition to create not a simple action spectacle, but a psychological drama about repressed rage, generational trauma, and the monstrous consequences of scientific ambition. Below is a thorough examination of every significant casting decision in the film. Eric Bana as Bruce Banner, Hulk. The casting of Eric Bana as Bruce Banner was one of the more inspired and unexpected decisions in early 2000s superhero cinema. Bana, the Australian actor who had established his dramatic credibility through Chopper 2000 and demonstrated his action capability in Black Hawk Down, was not the most obvious choice for the conflicted physicist whose gamma radiation accident transforms him into a raging green behemoth. But Lee was not looking for an obvious choice. He was looking for a performer whose specific qualities served the psychological drama he was constructing. Lee cited influences from King Kong, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, Beauty and the Beast, Faust, and Greek mythology for his interpretation of the story. This extraordinarily eclectic list of literary and cinematic references revealed the kind of performer Lee needed, someone capable of inhabiting a character who carried the weight of multiple mythological traditions simultaneously: the tortured scientist, the split personality, the beautiful monster, the Promethean overreacher. Bana's naturally reserved internal quality, the stillness that had made his Chopper performance so unsettling, gave Bruce Banner a suppressed intensity that communicated the character's psychology before a word of dialogue was spoken. Banner commented that the shoot was ridiculously serious. It wasn't like a lot of laughing going on. This observation, the Australian actor, accustomed to the more relaxed set cultures of Hollywood and Australian production, captured something essential about Lee's approach to the material. The director treated Hulk not as a comic book movie but as a character study, and the intensity of the set reflected that creative philosophy. Bana's performance required him to play two dramatically different registers: the quiet, emotionally constrained Banner, whose repressed memories and suppressed anger define his surface personality, and the explosively violent Hulk, whose raging physicality was rendered entirely through CGI, but whose emotional foundation was Bana's performance. The live action performance was captured through motion reference and then translated into the digital Hulk character by ILM, a process that required Bana to provide the emotional blueprint for a creature he would never physically embody on screen. Jennifer Connelly as Betty Ross. Jennifer Connelly plays Betty Ross, Bruce's girlfriend and colleague, General Ross's estranged daughter, and possibly the only one who can make the Hulk revert into Bruce. Connelly, who had won the Academy Award for Supporting Actress for Best Supporting Actress for A Beautiful Mind just 2 years earlier, brought a level of dramatic distinction to the role that redefined what a superhero love interest could be. Director Ang Lee attracted Connelly to the role. He's not talking about a guy running around in green tights and a glossy, fun filled movie for kids. He's talking along the lines of tragedy and psychodrama. I find it interesting. The green monster of rage and greed, jealousy and fear in all of us. Connelly's statement is one of the most revealing pieces of casting context in the film's production history. She explicitly stated that she was attracted not to the spectacle of a comic book film, but to Lee's promise of something darker and more psychologically complex, tragedy and psychodrama rather than glossy fun. This expectation shaped her performance. Betty Ross, as Connelly played her, was not a damsel or a cheerleader, but a scientist and a daughter navigating the intersection of professional crisis and family dysfunction. The character's estranged relationship with her father, General Thunderbolt Ross, who has spent years pursuing the military applications of Banner's research, gave Connelly a familial drama that operated independently of the romantic plot. Betty's position between the two most important men in her life, both of whom are failing her in different ways, demanded the emotional complexity that Connelly's Oscar winning talent could provide. Sam Elliott as General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. Sam Elliott plays General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, a four-star general and Betty's estranged father. Ross was responsible for prohibiting David Banner from his lab work after learning of his dangerous experiments. Elliot said his performance was similar to his portrayal of Basil L. Plumley in We Were Soldiers. Elliot accepted the role without reading the script, being excited to work with Ang Lee and researched Hulk comic books for the part. Where the detail that Elliot accepted the role without reading the script, motivated entirely by the opportunity to work with Ang Lee, speaks to the director's magnetic pull on serious dramatic talent. Lee's reputation as an artist, established through Sense and Sensibility, The Ice Storm, and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, was itself a casting tool. Performers of Eliot's caliber committed to his vision based on faith in his artistic judgment rather than on the specific content of the screenplay. Eliot's Thunderbolt Ross was one of the most physically and vocally distinctive military figures in superhero cinema. His iconic mustache, his weathered bearing, his deep Western drawl, all the qualities that had made him one of American cinema's most recognizable character actors, were deployed in service of a military patriarch whose obsessive pursuit of the Hulk was inseparable from his complex feelings about his daughter, his legacy, and his own professional failures. The comparison to his We Were Soldiers performance, another military authority figure defined by rigid discipline and suppressed emotion, captured the specific dramatic register Elliot was working in. Nick Nolte as David Banner. Nick Nolte plays David Banner, Bruce's mentally unstable biological father, who was also a genetics research scientist and had been locked away for 30 years for causing an explosion in the gamma reactor and accidentally killing his wife Edith. Nolte's casting was the film's most audacious and controversial decision, The actor, whose career had encompassed Oscar nominated performances in The Prince of Tides, Affliction, and Warrior, had been experiencing well publicized personal difficulties in the period immediately preceding the film's production, including a highly photographed September 2002 arrest that had generated worldwide media attention. His appearance in Hulk, disheveled, wild eyed, operating at a pitch of intensity that many critics found excessive, was simultaneously a brave artistic commitment and a performance whose relationship to the actor's real life circumstances could not be entirely separated from its dramatic context. In an interview with the BBC, Nolte described David Banner as a true Shakespeare character, comparing the role's moral complexity and emotional extremity to the great tragic figures of the English dramatic tradition. The Shakespearean comparison was not mere self aggrandizement. David Banner, as written by Shamus and performed by Nolte, was a figure of genuine tragic dimension, a scientist whose ambition destroyed his family, whose madness was the direct consequence of his genius, and whose return into his son's life represents the eruption of the past into the present with the force of a classical catastrophe. Nolte's performance was the most divisively received element of the entire production. Critics who embraced it saw a committed actor delivering a performance of operatic intensity appropriate to Lee's mythological ambitions. Critics who rejected it saw an uncontrolled, self indulgent display that overwhelmed the film's dramatic framework. The debate about Nolte's performance was, in many respects, a proxy for the larger debate about the film itself, whether Lee's psychological ambitions enhanced or undermined the comic book material he was adapting. Josh Lucas as Glenn Talbot. Josh Lucas plays Glenn Talbot, a military industrial figure whose ambition to exploit the Hulk's potential for corporate and military profit makes him the film's secondary antagonist. Jesus, whose career included A Beautiful Mind, Sweet Home Alabama, and later Ford v Ferrari, brought a quality of smooth, calculating menace to Talbot that contrasted with Nolte's wild-eyed intensity and Elliot's weathered stoicism. Talbot is Betty's former suitor and current professional rival to Banner, and Lucas' portrayal emphasized the character's competitive narcissism, a man who sees the Hulk not as a tragedy but as an opportunity, and whose inability to comprehend the human dimension of Banner's situations itself a form of monstrousness. Lucas gave Talbot the specific energy of a corporate predator, charming, confident, and completely indifferent to the human cost of his ambitions. Paul Kersey as young David Banner and Cara Buono as Edith Banner. Paul Kersey plays young David Banner in the film's extended flashback sequences that establish the origin of the family's tragedy. Kersey's performance playing the younger version of Nolte's character. During the period of his initial genetic experiments and his marriage to Edith, needed to communicate both the genuine scientific passion that drove David's research and the seeds of the obsession that would eventually destroy his family. Cara Buono plays Edith Banner, Bruce's mother, whose death at David's hands is the traumatic event that defines Bruce's entire psychological life. Buono, who would later gain widespread recognition as Karen Wheeler in Stranger Things, brought genuine warmth and tragedy to a character whose brief screen time needed to establish both the love that Bruce has lost and the violence that his mind has repressed. Lou Ferrigno and Stan Lee as security guards. Lou Ferrigno and Stan Lee appear together as security guards in a cameo that was simultaneously a piece of fan service, a franchise tradition, and a subtle passing of the torch. Ferrigno who had physically portrayed the Hulk in the 1978-1982 television series, and Lee, the character's co-creator, sharing a brief scene together in the new adaptation connected the 2003 film to both the character's television heritage and his comic book origins. Todd Tesson as young Ross and Mike Irwin as teenage Bruce Banner. Todd Tesson plays the younger version of Sam Elliott's General Ross in the film's flashback sequences, while Mike Irwin plays teenage Bruce Banner in the sequences depicting Bruce's adolescence. Both performers needed to provide physical and vocal continuity with the adult versions of their characters, ensuring that the film's extended temporal structure, spanning from David Banner's early experiments through Bruce's childhood and adolescence to the present day, felt like a coherent narrative rather than a series of disconnected episodes. Daniel Dae Kim, as A. Daniel Dae Kim, plays an AD in the film's military and government sequences. Kim, who would later achieve international fame through Lost and Hawaii 5-0, appeared in an early career role that, while limited in scope, placed him within the institutional machinery of the military world that General Ross commands. His presence, even in a minor capacity, would take on additional significance in retrospect as his subsequent career established him as one of the most prominent Asian American actors in Hollywood. The ensemble as a whole taken together, the casting of Hulk 2003 represents one of the most dramatically ambitious ensembles ever assembled for a comic book adaptation. An Oscar winner, Connelly, an Oscar nominee, Nolte, one of American cinema's most iconic character actors, Elliot, an emerging international star, Bana, and a roster of supporting performers whose subsequent careers confirm their talent, all brought together by a two-time Oscar-winning director, Lee, whose vision for the material demanded nothing less than the dramatic commitment of the most serious art house production. The film's critical and commercial reception, a polarizing response that divided audiences and critics almost exactly in half, reflected the tension inherent in Lee's casting strategy. By populating a superhero film with performers of genuine dramatic distinction and asking them to treat the material as psychological tragedy, Lee created a production whose human performances were simultaneously the film's greatest asset and its most controversial element. Critics who valued the ambition praised exactly what those who rejected it condemned: the weight, the seriousness, the refusal to treat comic book source material as mere entertainment. The cast's collective quality, and particularly the performances of Bana, Connelly, and Nolte, gave the film a dramatic density that no previous superhero film had attempted, and few subsequent ones would match. Whether that density enhanced or overwhelmed the material remains a matter of genuine critical debate more than 2 decades after the film's release, but the quality of the performances themselves, the specific work that these distinguished artists invested in their characters, has never been seriously questioned. Production development. 13 years of scripts and directors, 1990 to 2002. The development of Hulk, 2003, is one of the most protracted and turbulent in the history of superhero cinema. A 13-year journey through multiple studios, directors, screenwriters, and creative visions that saw the project nearly abandoned multiple times before finally reaching the screen under Ang Lee's direction. Producers Avi Arad and Gail Ann Hurd began developing Hulk in 1990, the same year of the airing of the final television film based on the 1970s television series The Death of the Incredible Hulk. They set the property up at Universal Pictures in 1992. Michael France and Stan Lee were invited into Universal's offices in 1993, with France writing the script. Universal's concept was to have the Hulk battle terrorists, an idea France disliked. John Turman, a Hulk comic book fan, was brought in to write the script in 1994, getting Lee's approval. Heavily influenced by the Tales to Astonish issues, Turman wrote 10 drafts and pitted the Hulk against General Ross, the military, and the leader, also including Rick Jones and the atomic explosion origin from the comics, along with Brian Banner as the explanation for Bruce's inner anger. Universal had mixed feelings over Turman's script, but future screenwriters would use many elements. Heard brought her husband Jonathan Hensley as co producer the following year, and Universal hired Industrial Light and Magic to create the Hulk with CGI. Joe Johnston became the director in April 1997. The studio wanted Hensley to rewrite the script due to his successful results on Johnston's Jumanji 1995. Universal fired France before he wrote a single page but gave him a buy-off. Johnston dropped out of directing in July 1997 in favor of October Sky 1999, and Hensley convinced Universal to make the Hulk his directing debut. Zach Penn then rewrote the script. His script featured a fight between the Hulk and a school of sharks. Hensley rewrote from scratch, coming up with a brand new storyline featuring Bruce Banner, who experiments with gamma irradiated insect DNA on three convicts, transforming them into insect men that cause havoc. Filming was to start in December 1997 in Arizona for a mid 1999 release, but was pushed back. Hensley subsequently rewrote the script with J.J. Abrams. Scott Alexander and Larry Karasevsky were also brought on board. Gregory Sporleder was cast as Novak, Banner's archenemy, while Lynn Williams was cast as a convict who transforms into a combination of human, ant, and beetle. In March 1998, Universal put Hulk on hiatus due to its escalating $100 million budget and worries of Hensley directing his first film. $20 million was already spent on script development, computer animation, and prosthetics work. Hensley found the rewriting process too complicated and resigned, saying he wasted 9 months in pre production. France claimed someone within the Universal hierarchy wasn't sure if this was a science fiction adventure or a comedy, and I kept getting directions to write both. I think that at some point, when I wasn't in the room, there may have been discussions about turning it into a Jim Carrey or Adam Sandler movie. The revelation that Universal at one point considered transforming the Hulk into a Jim Carrey or Adam Sandler comedy vehicle is one of the more alarming pieces of the film's development history, a testament to the institutional uncertainty that plagued the project. Michael Tolkien and David Hayter rewrote the script even after the producer's positive response to France's script. Hayter's draft features the leader, Zezax, and Absorbing Man as the villains, depicted as Banner's colleagues caught in the same accident. Ang Lee and James Shamus take over. Director Ang Lee and his producing partner James Shamus became involved with the film on January 20, 2001. Lee chose not to direct Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, and instead began work on the film. He was dissatisfied with Hayter's script and commissioned Shamus for a rewrite, merging Banner's father with the Absorbing Man. Lee cited influences from King Kong, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, Beauty and the Beast, Faust, and Greek mythology to interpret the story. Shamus said he had found the storyline that introduced Brian Banner, allowing Lee to write a drama that again explored father son themes. This literary framework gave the film its distinctive identity within the superhero genre, a psychological drama about generational trauma wrapped in the spectacular trappings of a comic book adaptation. Samus was still rewriting the script in October 2001. Franz Turman and Samus received final writing credit after a Writers Guild arbitration process. Franz said, James Shamus did a significant amount of work on the screenplay. He brought in the Hulk dogs from the comics, and he made the decision to use Banner's father as a real character in the present. But he used quite a lot of elements from John Turman's scripts and quite a lot from mine, and that's why we were credited. Pre production casting Bana was cast in October 2001, signing for an additional two sequels. Ang Lee felt obliged to cast Bana upon seeing Chopper and first approached the actor in July 2001. Other actors heavily pursued the role. It was widely reported Billy Crudup turned down the role. Johnny Depp and Steve Buscemi were reportedly under consideration. David Duchovny and Jeff Goldblum auditioned. Edward Norton expressed interest but turned it down as he was disappointed with the script. Tom Cruise was also offered the role but turned it down. The extraordinary roster of actors who were considered, approached, or auditioned for the role Crudup, Depp, Buscemi, Duchovny, Goldblum, Norton, Cruise illustrates the degree of A-list interest the project generated despite its troubled development history. Jennifer Connelly was attracted to the role by Lee's vision. He's not talking about a guy running around in green tights and a glossy, fun filled movie for kids. He's talking along the lines of tragedy and psychodrama. Elliot accepted the role without reading the script, being excited to work with Ang Lee and researched Hulk comic books. Nolte agreed to participate when Lee described the project as a Greek tragedy. Filming principal photography, Arizona, California, and Utah filming began on March 18, 2000 in Arizona and moved on April 19 to the San Francisco Bay Area. Locations included Advanced Light Source, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, Oakland, Treasure Island Military Base, and the Sequoia Forests of Porterville before several weeks in the Utah and California deserts. The penultimate battle scene between Hulk and his father used the real Pear Lake in Sequoia National Park as a backdrop. Filming then moved to the Universal backlot in Los Angeles, using stage 12 for the water tank scene, and finished in the first week of August. Filming of Hulk constituted hiring 3,000 local workers, generating over $10 million in the local economy. The economic impact figure $10 million in local spending and 3,000 jobs underscores the scale of the production's physical footprint across multiple California locations. Eric Bana commented that the shoot was ridiculously serious, a silent set, morbid in a lot of ways. Lee told him that he was shooting a Greek tragedy and that he would be making a whole other movie about the Hulk at Industrial Light and Magic. Bana would later reflect on his experience making the film, as the majority of the time he was working indoors while the rest of the cast interacted with a CGI recreation of the Hulk. Computer animation supervisor Dennis Muren was on the set every day. So Lee's split screen technique to mimic comic book page panels cinematically required many more takes of individual scenes than usual. Lee originally wanted the Hulk to be completely naked, but to maintain a PG-13 rating, he couldn't commit to showing nudity throughout the film post-production visual effects. ILM and the CGI Hulk Muren and other ILM animators utilized previous technology originally used for the Dobby character from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets 2002 to create the Hulk with computer generated imagery. Additional software included Power Animator, Softimage 3D, Softimage XSI, and Pixar's RenderMan. ILM started computer animation work in 2001 and completed it in May 2003, just 1 month before the film's release. The 2 year CGI production timeline from 2001 to May 2003 and the completion date of just 1 month before theatrical release illustrate the enormous scale of the visual effects challenge and the pressure under which ILM's team was operating during the final stages of production. Lee provided some motion capture work in post production. The director's personal involvement in the Hulk's physical performance, providing motion capture reference for the character's movements, gave the CGI creature a quality of directorial authorship that pure animation from reference footage could not have provided. Sound design Gary Rydstrom at Skywalker Sound Gary Rydstrom handled sound design at Skywalker Sound. Rydstrom, one of the most decorated sound designers in cinema history with multiple Academy Awards, gave the film's soundscape the quality of physical reality that the CGI visuals needed to feel convincing. The Hulk's roars, the sound of his impacts, the environmental destruction, and the specific sonic character of each transformation all required sound design that communicated the creature's mass and power through auditory information. Music Danny Elfman and the score Danny Elfman composed the film score for Hulk as a replacement for Michael Dana, whose score was rejected by the studio executives because it had a non traditional approach and did not suit the film's tones. Elfman's involvement was confirmed nearly 3 months ahead of the film's release. He composed over 2 hours of music within 37 days. The circumstances of Elfman's hiring, replacing a composer whose completed score was rejected just months before release, then composing over 2 hours of orchestral music in barely more than a month, represent one of the most demanding last minute scoring assignments in modern blockbuster filmmaking. Dana, who had previously collaborated with Lee on Ride with The Devil and the Ice Storm, had produced a score that reflected Lee's artistic sensibility, but that studio executives found insufficiently conventional for a major summer blockbuster. Elfman's approach, constrained by the extreme time pressure, drew on his extensive experience scoring visually spectacular, emotionally complex genre films. Batman, Edward Scissorhands, Spider-Man, his ability to produce a coherent, thematically developed score across 37 days was a testament to both his compositional facility and his institutional understanding of what blockbuster scoring requires. The soundtrack album was released on June 17, 2003 by Decca Records. The album features Elfman's score as well as the song Set Me Free by Velvet Revolver, which plays during the end credits. Rasole's theatrical release and marketing in December 2001. A theatrical release date for June 20, 2003 was announced with the title of The Hulk. A 70-second teaser trailer debuted in theaters with the release of Spider-Man on May 3, 2002. Universal Pictures spent $2 1 million to market the film in a 30-second television spot during Super Bowl XXVI on January 26, 2003. Just weeks before the film's release, several work prints leaked on the internet. Universal launched an investigation for who was responsible for the leak. The public already criticized the story, the visual and special effects, although it was not the film's final editing cut. For the promotional campaign, Universal hired Nabisco, Post Consumer Brands, Pepsi, Hershey's, Kraft Foods, Conagra Brands, Glad, and Snack Foods Limited. The breadth of the promotional partnership roster reflects Universal's commercial ambitions for the property and the marketing expenditure committed to the June 2003 release. Home Media Hulk was released on VHS and DVD on October 28, 2003. The DVD includes behind the scenes footage, enhanced viewing options that allow users to manipulate a 3D Hulk model, and cast and crew commentaries. The film earned $61.2 million in DV sales during 2003. That's $61. 2 million in DVD sales represented a substantial home media performance that significantly improved the film's overall profitability beyond its theatrical gross. Hulk was released on HD DVD on December 12, 2006, on Blu-ray on September 16, 2008, and on Ultra HD Blu-ray on July 9, 2019. Hulk was added to Disney Plus in select regions on April 1, 2026 as part of an ongoing content supply deal with NBC Universal. The Disney Plus availability, arriving 23 years after the theatrical release, gave a new generation of viewers access to the film within the streaming ecosystem that now dominated home entertainment. Reception box office performance Hulk was released on June 20, 2003, grossing $24.3 million during its opening day. Its second day of release, it made $21.3 million. The film then earned $62.1 million in its opening weekend, which made it the 16th highest ever opener at the time. It managed to top the box office upon opening, beating out Finding Nemo. Moreover, it surpassed Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, to score the biggest June opening weekend. Hulk went on to score the fourth highest opening weekend for a Universal film, behind The Lost World, Jurassic Park, The Mummy Returns, and Bruce Almighty. It also achieved the fifth highest opening weekend for a 2003 film, trailing only behind Bruce Almighty, Finding Nemo, X2, and The Matrix Reloaded. Also, the film joined Too Fast, Too Furious, and Bruce Almighty to become one of three Universal films to make $50 million opening weekends. The opening weekend performance, $62.1 million, first place at the box office. Biggest June opening in history, was an unambiguous commercial triumph that appeared to justify every dollar of the film's $137 million budget and 13 years of development investment. But the second weekend told a catastrophically different story. With a second weekend drop of 70%, it was the first opener above $20 million to drop over 65%. At the time, the film had the second highest second weekend decline of any superhero film, behind Steel. It eventually made $18.8 million during its second weekend, rankings in second place below Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle. The 70% second weekend collapse was one of the most dramatic box office decline in modern cinema history, and one of the most revealing. A 70% drop indicates that opening weekend audiences were not merely unsatisfied but actively discouraging others from attending. Word of mouth was not merely weak but negative. The audience that turned out for the opening, based on marketing, star power, and curiosity about the visual effects, apparently communicated to their social networks that the film had not delivered on its commercial promises. The film grossed $132, $2 million in North America on a budget of $137 million. It made $113.2 million in foreign countries of $245 million, with a final North American gross of $132, $2 million. It became the largest opener not to earn $150 million. Internationally, the film performed modestly across global markets. In the UK, the film had made $5. $6 million during its opening weekend, combined with $2.1 million from previews. In Mexico, Hulk became Universal's biggest opening in the country, generating $4.6 million. In total, the international grosses include Argentina 1.2 million yen, Australia 9.6 million yen, France 9.6 million, Italy 8 million, Japan 7.6 million, Mexico 11 gave 6 million, South Korea 2.5 million, Spain 7.7 million, Taiwan, the United Kingdom 13.9 million, the worldwide total of $240. 4 million against the $137 million production budget before marketing costs placed the film in commercially disappointing territory. While the gross exceeded the production budget, the combination of marketing costs and the theatrical's distribution split meant that the film was unlikely to have been profitable through its theatrical run alone. Critical response aggregate scores upon opening. Hulk received mixed to positive reviews from critics. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, Hulk holds a 63% approval rating based on 237 reviews and an average rating of 6.4/10. The website's critics consensus reads, while Ang Lee's ambitious film earns marks for style and an attempt at dramatic depth, there's ultimately too much talking and not enough smashing. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 54 out of 100 based on 40 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences scored IGN's film average grade of B minus on an A plus to F scale. The Rotten Tomatoes consensus, too much talking and not enough smashing, was perhaps the most quoted critical assessment of the film, distilling the audience's commercial complaint into 7 words. The cinema score B minus was one of the lowest audience grades for a major superhero release, confirming that the theatrical audience's dissatisfaction was not merely projected by box office analysts but measured by direct polling. Selected positive reviews. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave a positive review and rated Hulk 3 stars out of 4, explaining Ang Lee is trying to actually deal with the issues in the story of the Hulk instead of simply cutting to brainless visual effects. Ebert also liked the performances, the innovative editing, and appreciated how the Hulk's movements resembled the stop motion effects in the 1930s film King Kong. Although Peter Travers of Rolling Stone felt Hulk should have been shorter, he heavily praised the action sequences, especially the climax and cliffhanger. Paul Clinton of CNN believed the cast gave strong performances but criticized the computer generated imagery, calling the Hulk a ticked off version of Shrek. Mick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle considered the film is more thoughtful and pleasing to the eye than any blockbuster in recent memory, but its epic length comes without an epic reward. Selected negative reviews. Ty Burr of the Boston Globe felt Jennifer Connelly reprises her stand by your messed up scientist turn from A Beautiful Mind. Lisa Schwartzbaum of Entertainment Weekly stated, a big budget comic book adaptation has rarely felt so humorless and intellectually defensive about its own pulpy roots. The Schwartzbaum assessment, intellectually defensive about its own pulpy roots, identified a quality that distinguished Lee's film from its superhero contemporaries. The suggestion was that Lee and Shamus were so determined to demonstrate the seriousness of their approach that they forgot to honor the entertainment value of the source material. Retrospective reappraisal. Hulk received retrospective praise from critics for its artistic difference from other superhero films. In 2012, Matt Zoller Seat cited it as one of the few big budget superhero films that really departed from formula. in terms of subject matter or tone, writing that the film is pretty bizarre in its old school Freudian psychology, but interesting for that reason. In Scout Tafoya's 2016 video essay, he mentioned Hulk as Lee's ill-fated but quietly soulful and deeply sad adaptation of the Incredible Hulk comics. In 2018, Peter Sobczynski of Roger Ebert Calm wrote that the film is a genuinely great example of cinematic pop art that deserves a reappraisal. One article calls it a road not taken in comic book adaptations, praising Popeye, Dick Tracy, and Hulk for their use of comic techniques such as masking, paneling, and page layout in ways the DCEU and MCU do not. The retrospective critical reappraisal is one of the most significant developments in the film's cultural afterlife. As the MCU established its dominant formula, polished, consistent, carefully managed, tonally uniform, the qualities that had made Hulk commercially unsuccessful became, in retrospect, the qualities that made it artistically interesting. Lee's psychological depth, his visual experimentation, his willingness to make audiences uncomfortable with the implications of his protagonist's condition, and his commitment to the father son drama at the expense of action spectacle were precisely the qualities that the MCU's formula systematically avoided. Awards recognition Connelly and Danny Elfman received nominations at the 30th Saturn Awards with Best Actress and Best Music. The film was nominated for Best Science Fiction Film but lost out to X2. Dennis Muren, Michael and Thierry and the special effects crew were nominated for Best Special Effects. Legacy and the sequel that never was in March 2002. During filming, producer Avi Arad targeted a May 2005 theatrical release date for a sequel. Upon the film's release, screenwriter James Shamus started to plan a sequel featuring Hulk's Grey Hulk persona and considered using the Leader and the Abomination as villains. Shamus envisioned the sequel to take place on a Native American reservation, stating it was very radioactive and very political. He would later walk away from the project. In January 2006, Marvel Studios reacquired the film rights, and writer Zach Penn began work on a sequel titled The Incredible Hulk. However, Edward Norton rewrote Penn's script after signing on to star, retelling the origin story in flashbacks and revelations to establish the film as a reboot. Director Louis Leterrier agreed with this approach. Leterrier acknowledged that the only remaining similarity between the two films was Bruce hiding in South America. In 2021, Bana was asked if he would reprise his role in a future MCU project. He replied, when I went and did that film, that was kind of like pre-Marvel universe, right? That universe didn't even really exist. So it always just felt like a one-time film for me. The short answer is no. Ang Lee's Hulk stands as one of the most artistically ambitious and commercially divisive superhero films ever made. A production whose 13-year development process, $137 million budget, the Dangerous Group, and collective talent of an Oscar winning director and Oscar winning actress, and some of the finest character actors in American cinema produced a film that was simultaneously too much for its mainstream audience and not enough for its commercial ambitions. Its retrospective rehabilitation, the growing critical consensus that it is a road not taken in superhero cinema, the Dangerous Group, an experiment worth preserving even if could not be sustained, gives it a legacy more interesting and more enduring than its box office performance ever suggested was possible. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it wasn't unusual to see comic book superhero movies and TV shows that deviated wildly from the source material or got dumbed down for a wider audience. Things started to turn around with the boom of the X Men and Spider Man movies. This is one of the reasons why Ang Lee's Hulk is such a peculiar oddity. Rather than the usual hack director or apathetic studio messing with the material, it was an artist doing the same thing for decidedly artistic reasons. In some ways, it's the first summer superhero adventure that went too far in the opposite direction rather than crafting the definitive adaptation of the comics or the popular 70s TV show. Lee used the basic premise to make his own separate points on the material that he found more interesting than the jolly green giant smashing things. The result is a lyrical, effects filled Greek tragedy that's high on psychological angst and low on thrilling property destruction. The first half hour is aggravating to sit through as we watch talented actors like Jennifer Connelly and Eric Bana draw on in hushed tones about science and feelings as scenes are punctuated by dreamlike flashbacks and transitions. Bana described the Hulk set as ridiculously serious to the point of being morbid in a lot of ways, and it comes through on film. Lee is great at building atmosphere, but his talents for creating tension leave much to be desired here. Many of those early scenes could be trimmed down without losing anything significant. The main antagonist for this film is set up as Bruce Banner's scientist father David, played in present day by a gruff and frazzled Nick Nolte, whose genetic experiments on himself were passed on to his son. Josh Lucas, Marmy Talbot, and Sam Elliott's largely sympathetic General Ross get a share of the action, but the main conflict belongs to Nolte, who seems like the only actor who's having any fun. As an adult, David poses as a janitor and sabotages Bruce's gamma radiation research. Despite the changes in setting and circumstance, the film thankfully keeps Bruce's heroic sacrifice from the comics when he uses his own body to block the deadly radiation leak from harming others. But the altered cells he inherited from his father combine with the gamma rays and instead save his life and later triggers the Hulk transformation. Much later, action wise, much of the film feels like it's in a holding pattern. Even when Bruce first hulks out completely alone and without any compelling reason to do so and tears apart the lab, the plot still doesn't really get going. Bruce's journey, though packed to the gills with complexity and metaphor, is compelling enough in its tragic element to keep the central story from getting stale. Once the story gets going, anyway. The strangest directorial flourish is Lee's method of filling the screen with multiple panels like a comic book page, showing the scene unfold from a variety of angles and perspectives simultaneously while making a not so subtle nod to the character's printed origins. It helps give the movie its distinct look, but since it doesn't enhance the story or develop the characters, the effect is more gimmicky and distracting than anything else. Hulk is still Lee's most effects heavy production by a wide margin, and surprisingly, that effects work ranks high among the film's strengths. Lee manages to imbue the Green Goliath with believable heart and soul. Some fans complained that the Hulk was too oversized or bore too much resemblance to Shrek and or Gumby, but there's nothing wrong with the movie that would be fixed with better special effects. Once the story finds time to work in some action, almost begrudgingly, the results are often middling. The Hulk's extended battle with General Ross' armed forces has some cool moments, but it's far too restrained to generate much tension, and not just because the Hulk takes no damage. The filmmakers go out of their way to assure the viewer that all uniformed combatants sustain only minor injuries, because apparently, as soon as Hulk kills someone, he really is just a monster. But that approach has the unfortunate side effect of robbing the Hulk's near limitless power of any real danger for anyone. For my money, the film's best action sequence is the fight with the dogs, despite the scene's general silliness and SFX dependence. But it really is the only point in the movie where the gloves come off and the titular Leviathan is allowed to cut loose and kill things. Can a summer action thriller also be somber and cerebral? Of course. But despite a valiant effort, Hulk doesn't even come close to pulling it off. Ultimately, the biggest issue working against the film is its supreme lack of fun. Lee goes out of the way to balance the scenes of Hulk smashing with scenes of him sitting around staring at flowers. Regardless of overall quality, it's easy to see why the Incredible Hulk reboot was necessary. Hulk doesn't fit in with Marvel's other cinematic efforts over the years. It's an interesting movie, both in its deeper narrative and as a valiant attempt at something new. As an ambitious piece of art and a meditative character study, there's a lot that works. As a Hulk movie, a superhero movie, and a summer blockbuster, it's far too concerned with brooding and daddy issues to have any fun with the material. It's cerebral but not terribly exciting. It doesn't really hold up on repeat viewings, and yet, for all its flaws, it's worth checking out at least once. Ang Lee is arguably one of the greatest directors to make a superhero film. Given his eclectic, widely varied filmography, from the timeless Brokeback Mountain and Sense and Sensibility to the Ice Storm and Life of Pi, you'd think that if he made a superhero film, it would be one of the greatest ever made, right? Sadly, that isn't what happened, as his 2003 film Hulk was widely dismissed as a failed experiment, self serious drag trying too hard to be a Greek tragedy. The cast of A list talent, ranging from Eric Bana to Jennifer Connelly to Sam Elliott, all feel like they've had every ounce of tangible personalities squeezed out of them for the sake of a serious adult experience. But that only applies when this film has human characters leaning into melodrama. When the Hulk shows up, it's a thrilling ride with some of the most well choreographed action in superhero cinema, albeit with some shaky cinematography. What makes it so potent is how it focuses on its strongest theme, the idea that the Hulk is a product of the emotional and mental abuse Eric Bana, suffered at the hands of his father, David Banner Nick Nolte. The Hulk is an animal raging against the anguish of being mistreated by both the world that allowed him to get soaked in gamma radiation, but also the person who was supposed to protect him. In a time when it feels like films are either afraid to or disinterested in acknowledging how nightmarish this scenario would be to go through, Hulk is the film that confronts that reality head on. Eric Bana's Hulk is deeply rooted in childhood trauma. Most of the setup of the film will be familiar to those who know the Hulk. Bruce Banner is a scientist working with gamma radiation with his partner Betty Ross Connelly, and Bruce gets bathed in gamma radiation when an experiment goes wrong. But he wakes up feeling stronger than ever, which raises the suspicion of General Thaddeus Ross Elliot, who fears for his daughter Betty's safety, knowing that they're a couple. In the background, Glenn Talbot, Josh Lucas, represents a private company that wants in on Bruce and Betty's research for the purpose of making super soldiers. When Bruce was a child, David experimented on him as part of an unauthorized experiment on genetic mutation. When it failed, he tried to kill Bruce for his own protection, of course, but wound up killing his wife instead as she tried to protect him, all in front of 4-year-old Bruce. So Bruce was sent off to foster care and stuck with this trauma that he presumably never shared with anyone. The first time that Bruce fully transforms into the Hulk, he experiences an avalanche of memories that encapsulate his relationship problems with Betty Ross, who's more than just Hulk's girlfriend. including the visceral images of his mom racing to hide him from his dad while his dad brandishes a kitchen knife. Not to mention that when he goes on his rampage through the lab, he caps off by destroying the gamma machine that caused his affliction, as if his rage subconsciously drove him to seek revenge on that which has destroyed his life. On top of that, his father shows up in the lab, and there's a tender moment where David cradles Hulk's face, but Hulk gets enraged by the memories of his father's abuse flooding back and he escapes. It's an entire sequence of the Hulk's birth book ended by his greatest mental damage being brought to the surface. Every time Bruce transforms into the Hulk, they all come as a result of Bruce being either openly antagonized by others in a manner that is completely violating his mental state, or he's being pushed into reliving the worst memory of his life. The third time he gets transformed is arguably the most direct version of this traumatic connection. Bruce has been imprisoned in an isolation tank in a hidden military lab, watched over by Ross and Talbot. They want to drain him of his enzymes so they can use his DNA for their super soldier project. In order to get these enzymes, they have to ensure he's in Hulk form. So they zap him in a way that triggers his repressed memory of seeing his mom die. Not surprisingly, this does indeed trigger him, and once again, he is victimized and caged by people that care nothing for the trauma he is being forced to relive. The MCU mishandled the Incredible Hulk. One of the big problems with other versions of the Hulk is that they don't feel all that terrible or monstrous, as if they save their most dangerous urges for cool poses and make sure it only destroys the bad enemies. The Hulk has now been in the MCU for over a decade, and the only time he's truly ever hulked out and run a rampage was when he was cornered by the military twice in The Incredible Hulk and when he was under direct mind control in Avengers. Age of Ultron. At this point, Hulk's so evolved and smart that he can barely be bothered to be destructive at all in Avengers Endgame. The point is that Ang Lee's Hulk has none of that begrudging resistance to actually staring into the darkness. This is a Hulk that is a twitchy, chaotic, screaming child. Unlike in the MCU, where his screams and outbursts are primed for a promo. Still, this Hulk has a constant undercurrent of not only anguish and animalistic confusion, but also genuine human tics. Take when he is trying to split open the gamma sphere and he can't do it, so he throws his arms up like a brat throwing a tantrum. Or there's the time he's being attacked by tanks in the desert when he escapes the military lab. When he throws one tank clear across the horizon, he lets out this scream with a shoulder shrugging motion like a kid stamping his foot when he doesn't get his way. The existential horror explored in Hulk, with all of these moments of more childish behavior mixed in with his usual rage, it underlines the constant existential nightmare that is the existence of the Hulk. Imagine being an adult forced to transform into an even larger, unimaginably jacked person when the worst traumatic memories of your life get triggered, combined with the worst anger issues and worst self control. Oh, and you don't remember doing any of it when you go back to being your regular self. What about any of this sounds like an experience a person would openly want to engage in for the sake of heroism? Not to mention the fact that this film captures the body horror of the Hulk unlike any other version. Almost every other version of the Hulk, be it MCU or the Lou Ferrigno Hulk, or any number of cartoons, has largely skimmed out on capturing the full extent of what happens to Bruce's body in order to transform, whether it's for the sake of a low budget or trying to not scare a younger audience. The few times we've seen Bruce transform in the MCU, It happens so quickly and usually for the sake of a gag that any real strife or pain is completely wiped away. With Ang Lee's version, every time he transforms is a masterclass in body horror, where you actually get a tangible feel for how agonizing every moment of it must be. The sound design is exquisite, perfectly nailing that impossible to fathom sensation of your body completely rewriting itself in real time, of muscle tendons stretching and molecular cells rapidly evolving. While Hulk is not a full fledged hidden gem, its merits as an adaptation of the Hulk itself have been largely buried by the more obvious flaws. The idea of tying his origins to concepts like generational trauma and repressed mental health problems feels ahead of its time as a conception, considering how just recently are we more likely to see superhero films openly discussing topics such as racism, sexism, systemic flaws in the government, and grief. Considering how much credit Christopher Nolan got for grounding his The Dark Knight trilogy in a tangible psychological context, it should stand to reason that Hulk should get some love for at least attempting the same thing at a time when superhero films were far more pop art centered. Ang Lee is a director with a gift for tapping into the inner turmoil of characters who feel incapable of expressing themselves. So it's fitting that his superhero film is about a man whose life is destroyed by the innermost buried feelings that explode out of him. If only more superhero films were as upfront about the most potentially monstrous parts inside all of us, unlike most of the people who will probably be buying tickets to see the Hulk. My main frame of reference won't be the popular 70s television series. That series, which starred the late Bill Bixby and bodybuilder actor Lou Ferrigno, who makes a brief cameo as a security guard alongside Hulk creator Stan Lee early in the film, was a mere shadow of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's creation, a psychological human drama that was reduced down to a remake of The Fugitive with a gamma radiated alter ego. To be fair, the comic book that both that series and Ang Lee's new film, The Hulk, is based upon, has had its share of ups and downs over the years. One of the earliest creations of Stan the Man Lee in the 1960s, and one of the linchpins of Marvel Comics' superhero resurgence, Hulk never sold well and went through long periods of being a dreadful comic. Despite the occasional high spots, like an adaptation of Harlan Ellison's Hugo Award winning The Beast Who Shouted Love at the Heart of the World, and writer Bruce Jones's current run on the book, Hulk has long been one of those comics that Marvel kept in print almost because the company was expected to credit director Ang Lee for seeing past that, making the attempt to dig deep into the heart of the Hulk and try to come away with some essence of Lee's creation while updating and transforming the character for the big screen. The screenplay by John Turman, Michael France, and James Schamus is no masterpiece. The plot is pretty thin. They take a little too long to get to the creation of Bruce Banner's green skinned alter ego, and a battle at the end of the film not only looks like it was an afterthought, it's just plain silly. No, Anj. A film like The Hulk proves why we don't just hand theater goers copies of the screenplay. Lee's direction helps save this movie from being a complete disaster, but more on that in a moment. The story opens with Bruce Banner's father, Dr. David Banner, another nod to the Kenneth Johnson produced 1970s television series, performing experiments to enhance cellular regeneration in 1966. Working at the appropriately named desert base, Banner is reporting to Major Ross, who orders the experiments to end with animal trials. In true Dr. McCoy fashion, Banner is so convinced of his work that he tries it on himself. When Banner's wife announces she is pregnant, panic begins to set it. Has this self inflicted genetic mutation passed to his child? Of course it has. When Ross learns of the experiments, he orders Banner arrested, but not before Banner flies into a rage, committing some horrific acts resulting in his incarceration for 30 years. Jump forward in time, young Bruce Banner has become a doctor himself, researching the use of nanotechnology as a means to repair damaged tissue. An accident with the nanotechnology combines with the young man's unique physiology, creating something new, something he can't control that is fueled by his rage and repressed memories of his own father's actions. The Hulk emerges and goes on the expected rampage of Godzilla like proportions. Lee's direction saves this film by using the rectangular movie screen the same way a comic book artist uses the page. Lee's use of multiple and often moving frames invokes the panel layout feel of a comic without turning it into a tongue in cheek, silly romp. This is the kind of film that anamorphic widescreen DVDs were created for, as any attempt to pan and scan this thing will result in an unintelligible visual mess. It would have been easy to turn the Hulk into a comic book parody, another superhero film that is full of little sight gags, something easily digested by most audiences. Fortunately, Lee looks deeper into the spirit of the Hulk, bringing out the darkness that has always existed in the character. This isn't Spider Man or the X Men. The Hulk is and always has been a monster story along the lines of Frankenstein, with shades of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Says a reader or viewer, you can sympathize with the monster and even understand his actions while completely understanding why the other characters would much rather he never visit their town. Unlike most other superheroes, the Hulk isn't the recipient of a really cool ability that helps him fight crime in order to satisfy a promise to a loved one or exact revenge on bad guys who wronged him or his parents. The Hulk is a tortured soul, shunned by the world and forced to fight only because the world cannot or will not tolerate his existence. Lee effectively manages to convey these levels of conflict within the computer generated monster by getting into the motion capture suit himself, ensuring that the monster on the screen conveys exactly the physical movements the director wants on the screen. The direct involvement has a positive impact on the finished film, as the character of Hulk really does seem to work most of the time. Lee also manages to get the most from his cast, especially veteran actor Sam Elliott as General Thunderbolt Ross, who leads the military attack on the Hulk. Elliott carries himself in a way only a few actors in Hollywood can, and his presence brings a stabilizing influence to the film. Jennifer Connelly seems to be playing the same character she won an Oscar for in A Beautiful Mind, a beautiful woman trying desperately to save the brilliant man she loves. Only this time he turns green and smashes tanks instead of seeing Ed Harris everywhere. Eric Bana does a credible job as the tortured Dr. Jekyll to the Hulk's CGI Mr. Hyde, but he really doesn't get to show much of his ability here. If the film does spawn a sequel, I can only hope that it gives Bana a little more to do between Hulk outs so the American audience can see just what a good actor this guy really is. In spite of its many faults, the Hulk is one of the more interesting attempts at bringing a comic book character to film. One could even say that those faults make it a more interesting film, one that deserves a look. Ang Lee directing a superhero movie. He's certainly a strange choice to handle the first big screen adaptation of Marvel's iconic green monster to the big screen, but arguably a smart one. Hulk is at its best when it hints at the psychological melodrama playing out behind its lead character. but suffers greatly from the fact that it is apparently really uncertain about its source material or what it wants to be. It's weird to see a movie so wonderfully risky in one sense, but so utterly bland in others. Hulk is an experiment, but sadly isn't consistent enough to be a successful one. I've remarked time and time again that Peter David is perhaps the best writer to work on the character of Bruce Banner and the Hulk. David took a character whose sole feature was his capacity to turn into a big green, muscle bound misanthrope when provoked and managed to add layers to the comic book creation. Why did the gamma radiation release a monster inside Banner, and why is it tied to his emotions? Is it an embodiment of his repressed urges? And if so, where do they stem from? Is the Hulk traditionally shown with the intellect and mindset of a child somehow anchored in Banner's childhood? David suggested that Banner's childhood, specifically an abusive relationship with his father, is a major factor in his transformations. Perhaps the strongest aspect of Ang Lee's adaptation is that it explores this wonderful pseudo psychological angle of the story. At its core, the movie is a story about fathers and their children, whether embodied in Betty's stoic and controlling father, General Ross, or Bruce's manipulative and exploitative father, David. Both want to control their children. Ross rationalizes that it's for his daughter's protection, which the movie reinforces by having Betty bounce between the two men in her life, Bruce and her father, while David makes no pretense. He gave his son life, so his son owes him big time. The problem is that the movie quite simply isn't sure how to explore this angle of the plot, so it falls back on classic comic book storytelling, and by classic, I mean silly. Ang Lee clearly wants to do right by his material. His use of on screen panels to represent the image of a divided comic book page is interesting, even if it doesn't always work out, but he's clearly uncomfortable with the material, so he throws everything against the wall and watches what sticks. The more intellectual material above plays out by making Bruce's father into a supervillain and having them grapple with each other rather than playing out to a fittingly subtle conclusion. You could argue that Ang Lee is merely showing his respect towards the full range of Hulk comics. Awkward moments like a confrontation with a mutant French poodle would have been at home in the hokey 60s comics and indeed formed the basis of an arc around the same time as the film, but not so much in the more considered and quiet explorations of the Banner father son relationship. The comics have shown the Hulk leaping great distances, but the image simply doesn't work on screen. The Hulk never goes nude on panel for fear of offending delicate sensibilities, but here Eric Bana must be wearing some incredibly stretchy boxers. There is half a century's worth of material featuring the character, and it's the writer and director who must find a way to synthesize that to create something which works on screen. The result we end up with here is something that looks like Lee was confused, staring at the comics and plucked disjointed ideas at random, rather than trying to build a smooth and consistent environment, which is a shame because there is some good stuff in here. It's just mixed with some really awful ideas. Banner is repressed and socially awkward, but he's played by hunky Eric Bana, who is quite charming with the material. Banner isn't a guy who you'd like to grab a beer with after. He's a nerdy little guy who is maybe nice but never quite fits in. Bana just can't channel the sort of discomfort or incompleteness that we need from the character. If Petty's dialogue didn't spell out his repression about his parents, we'd never realize that there was anything missing from his life. The rest of the cast don't really do any better. say. They all make valiant efforts, but they can't help but seem hopelessly miscast. Sam Elliott always looks ready to offer fatherly advice rather than representing a coldly repressive force in the life of his daughter. Jennifer Connelly can't find the right mix of quiet rebellion and the timidness of a woman caught between her father and her lover. Either the script portrays her as too weak a character, or Connelly can't make those flaws feel organic, but she doesn't feel right. Nick Nolte is probably the best member of the cast, but it helps that he's got the scenery chewing bad guy role. Nolte is creepy enough anyway, even without the scruffy look, and there's a pang of arrogant self righteousness which suits the character well. His character drives the most interesting aspects of the plot, and the best scenes feature Nolte and Bana interacting, but there aren't enough of them. I mean, no disrespect to Lee, but he appears to have great difficulty with the CGI aspect of production and maybe some other difficulties with the blockbuster nature of the production. When your first major action scene features some fairly wanton acts of animal cruelty by your protagonist, Hulk takes care of three mutant dogs, including a French poodle, viciously. It's more than likely you're missing the mark. The creature itself never looks right, and that's something more fundamental than the technology of the time. When the bullets hit him, his skin jiggles like fat. The Hulk should not look fat. The incredible bulk, anyone. The movie's action scenes never really take off, which is a shame because the second half is blocked full of them. Add to that the fact that the Hulk himself doesn't exactly look impressive. I know that he's meant to grow stronger the angrier he gets, but does it really have to look like Super Mario just took a mushroom? It's a shame because most of the CGI work is impressive, including that featuring Nolte, but not the main character. A green monster is always going to look ridiculous on film, but here his skin looks too smooth, particularly juxtaposed against real surroundings like rugged, rocky landscapes or San Francisco. In the end, Ang Lee's adaptation gets respect for its willingness to offer something more than Hulk smash, but that's somewhat negated by the fact that it doesn't seem to know or care about the character particularly much. One gets the sense that there was a roulette wheel in the production office that could have just as easily landed on becomes a bouncer in Las Vegas as paternal issues and the choice of material, everything from the core themes to the little quirks, doesn't come from a love or respect of the original source, but from random chance. Perhaps it's fitting that, like its subject matter, Hulk ends up as a failed experiment. Because he is unique, the world will not tolerate his existence. David Banner, Nick Nolte, describing his gamma ray infused son, Bruce, and Ang Lee's Hulk overall. The 2003 summer movie season arrived full of would be sure things, though only one of which looked incredible. There was a resounding shock that The Matrix Reloaded would emerge divisive and unloved, though no one was surprised that Jonathan Mostow's Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines wouldn't soar as high without creator James Cameron. Not only would Pixar end up on top with its universally adored Finding Nemo, but seemingly against all odds, an epic pirate movie starring Johnny Depp as a mangy, garrulous alcoholic buccaneer was also an instant classicist. Standing vast and alone in the opposite corner was the bulkiest and most promising of all the U3 summer flicks, the long awaited arrival of Marvel's The Incredible Hulk to the big screen. Director Ang Lee's eagerly anticipated March discussed and downright prestigious film was supposed to paint the summer green. Instead, after a massive opening, the controversy that plagued the film in the early months finally squashed it during its second week in theaters. To this day, Lee's Hulk remains the most reviled film in the Marvel Studios catalog. It's a cinematic black sheep that, while genuinely a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, more on that later, it's often referenced as fondly as Crystal Pepsi. The film career of Howie Long and other things that once sounded like a great idea. 15 years later, Lee's genuinely daring, defiant, and consistently innovative comic book art movie reveals itself to be horribly misunderstood and a vital work. An ideally cast Eric Bana stars as the nerdy, withdrawn scientist Bruce Banner, whose experiments involving gamma rays have caught the attention of the US military. Banner's lab partner, Betty Ross, admirably played by Jennifer Connelly, is in love with Banner but can't get past the emotional distance and secretive barrier he maintains from her and others. Betty's father, General Ross, Sam Elliott, excellent, is entirely aware of Bruce's horrific upbringing by his abusive, deranged, and believed to be dead father, David, and unsettling, feral looking Nick Nolte. Fast fact: Hulk earned $132 million during its US theatrical run, good for 14th place that year. The arrival of the snarky, sadistic Glenn Talbot, a never better Josh Lucas, who wants to exploit Bruce's scientific progress and is Betty's former lover, enrages Bruce. So does the sudden appearance of his father, who is conducting bizarre experiments of his own. A lab accident causes Bruce to save a colleague's life by absorbing life threatening amounts of gamma rays, which somehow make him feel more alive. The one big, incredible caveat: don't make him angry. You won't like him when he's angry. Lee's film is definitely out of step with summer blockbuster comic book movie expectations then and now. Even Richard Donner's 1978 Superman the movie had more audience accessibility and immediate razzle dazzle. Here, the approach is character driven and Freudian, with Lee's outer take on the material and the genre itself. The humor is light and droll. If anything, the early Stan Lee Lou Ferrigno cameo evokes the seriousness of the 1978-82 TV series, not the zippy fun of the previous year's Spider-Man. The opening credits with the recognizable Stan Lee fonts are just right. They establish a feature length motif that Lee fashions in a unique manner. This is a living comic book. The scene transitions often mimic how the eye follows the panel to panel storytelling of a graphic novel. The canvassing of the cinematic panels rivals anything from Peter Greenaway and makes for a playfully stylish movie. There's also split screens that offer multiple perspectives on varying moments, and even a great bit near the end where the action gets so intense the camera seems to pull back, revealing a sea of panels as though we needed to put this living comic book down for a moment. The editing by Tim Squires, who has shaped all of Lee's films, and cinematography by Frederick Elms, a frequent David Lynch collaborator, are brilliant. While the how 3 CGI by Industrial Light and Magic have been surpassed, there's still a soulfulness to Hulk's close ups and a rawness to his outbursts. The ample hallucinatory imagery is right out of Altered States. Unlike the cool effects in Doctor Strange, the surreal bits are truly jarring. Danny Elfman's score, with its brooding, Vertigo throwback, is as essential to this film as his triumphant score to Batman was for that film. The screenplay by James Shamus, Michael Franz, and John Turman adds heaps of melodrama to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's 1962 creation, fully in sync with Lee's risk taking approach and the intensity of the subject matter. This is a visionary comic book movie, akin to George A. Romero's Creepshow or Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy, as a celebration of the art and form of the medium. There's a richness to the filmmaking and story that eludes the current MCU. While Lee's creative interpretation of comic book motion pictures dominates the visual approach. It never dilutes the story's dramatic power. Hulk provides a metaphor for acting out our childhood demons and becoming what we fear, namely our parents. David refers to the Hulk as his real son, as the Hulk is the result of Bruce's horrible id unleashed. Contrastly, David refers to Bruce as the child of my mind, whose unsettling memories are physically blocked by doorways that led to death. The protagonists carry traumatic memories and share bitter detachment from their father's Ross, neglectful father, contrasted with Banner's abusive dad, both of whom worked together when Bruce and Betty were children. A key scene depicts Bruce and Betty revisiting a ghost town on a military base. It's an eerie moment in which they literally face their anguished past together. Fast fact: Eric Bana is glad, in retrospect, Hulk underperformed at the box office, freeing him to avoid the franchise trap. The ample flashbacks to Bruce and Betty's childhoods are disturbing. David Banner's scientific breakthroughs are never celebrated or glossed over, but treated at face value. They amounted to willfully harming a child and self inflicted madness. David tells Bruce during the grand finale, "The more you fight, the more of you I take." Bruce's grueling journey isn't merely to overcome military might or keep himself from becoming angered, but to overcome the dreadful assault his father has plagued on his innocent soul. Somehow, Hulk is even darker than the previous Marvel movie, Blade, which sported a fiendish glee to its anarchy. At one point, the military code for the Hulk is revealed to be Angry Man, a fine alternate title for this film. It's all strikingly similar to David Cronenberg's The Fly. Connelly's Betty isn't the standard girlfriend role, but a haunted witness, not unlike Geena Davis's Ronnie in the Cronenberg film. Betty even warns Bruce that emotional damage can manifest physically, not unlike Davis' Ronnie informing Jeff Goldblum's Seth Brundle that his carefree experiment should make him be afraid, be very afraid. Ronnie and Betty are both unable to soothe the savage impulses and self destructive tendencies of their lovers, leaving them helpless to watch good men become monsters. Both Hulk and the Fly center on an uneasy love triangle. Whoever the female lead ends up with, it's a losing choice. And the Atheon Corporation isn't unlike Bartok Industries. The theme of duality is explored with a complexity the film earns. A key recurring image is of Bruce shaving, wiping off the dew from a fogged up mirror. Late in the film, as he wipes the mirror, the reflection is of the Hulk's fingers, and it's the Hulk's face that glares back at Bruce. In a brilliant touch, the perspective changes, and suddenly we're on the Hulk's side of the mirror, looking at Bruce. Despite being Lee's first film post Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Oscar Glory, and Connelly's first since her celebrated turn in A Beautiful Mind. The resistance against Lee's film began well before the release date. A premature Super Bowl ad infamously cooled expectations with unfinished FX and the accompaniment of Grand Theft Auto's insanely caffeinated We Love You undermining the film's allure. Suddenly, the subtle show nothing teaser trailer from the year before, which played in front of Spider Man, became preferable. Then came a slew of mini controversies. Lee intended for Banner not to don his trademark purple stretchy pants during his Hulk outs and instead bounce around the desert and the rest of San Francisco in the buff. Any comic book movie that evokes both Ingmar Bergman and Ken Russell is doing something right. Click to tweet the outcry of fans threatening a boycott led to Banner wearing his improbably durable hammer pants after all. Then some nitwit put a pirated copy of the film online and served years of jail time, providing an unfortunate retort to the cellmate's question, "What ya in for?" The Hulk on opening weekend. Hulk boasted the mightiest June opening of all time, followed by one of the largest drops ever in the box office top 10. Word of mouth sank the film, which barely managed to pass the $100 million mark. Among the chief complaints were the largely action free first act, which focused on building Banner's tortured character arc. Once the action gets going in the second and third act, there's so much of it, the outcry of not enough Hulk smash seemed absurd. Likewise, Lee's odd but misunderstood monster movie throwback in which Hulk tussles with David Banner's three gigantic mutated canine companions. The entire sequence is an elaborate ode to the 1933 King Kong. Then there's the strange climax, presented with blatant theatricality, followed by a swirl of CGI. On top of seeming like the movie doesn't know how to wrap up following a perfect end to the sad, moving reunion in the SF climax, it pushes the daddy issues thrust of the screenplay into truly wacko territory. The bold, icky final confrontation is, if nothing else, a proper response to the establishing scenes of David Banner's reckless approach to parenting and the scientific method. Lee's wild interpretation of the material is totally at odds with the safe, individuality free filmmaking of the current MCU. The same goes for Bana's wounded, introverted take on Banner, evoking the damaged child within and the grown up trying to maintain his hard won humanity. Mark Ruffalo, a wonderful actor, is currently carrying the role, offering the masses a neutered take on a rich creation. Neither Ruffalo nor the character have ever been less interesting. Viewed with measured expectations and a willingness to accept Lee's novel approach to the comic book form, which, to be fair, wouldn't work for most other films in this genre. Hulk can be experienced as the radical work that it is. The film's detractors are many, but any comic book movie that evokes both Ingmar Bergman and Ken Russell is doing something right. Lee's Hulk came 5 years before the carefully mapped out MCU that began with Iron Man and is likely considered an outcast, and also ran that has been retroactively remade and is no longer a part of any cinematic universe. Yet, it certainly is a MCU member by default, as the 2008 The Incredible Hulk, with its new cast, filmmaker, and less challenging approach to the material, is a direct sequel to Hulk. While Edward Norton's Banner offers a new face to Banner, the Incredible Hulk picks off where Hulk left off and even shoehorns a cameo appearance by Tony Stark in the end credits to just barely solidify its MCU significance. Fast fact. Ang Lee said he wanted to tackle a blockbuster style movie like Hulk to show the format could offer more complicated stories than some might suggest. While Lee's structure in unconventional and most fanboys would angrily declare that the film exists outside of the MCU, this still fits in with recent MCU installments. The tropos are intact, including an origin story, a much interrupted romance, frequent, if not always faithful, nods to the source material, and even the Marvel logo are intact. Sorry, fanboys. But you were wrong about Hulk in 2003. Give it another try and offer it the proper respect it deserves, both as a singular achievement and as a part of the ubiquitous MCU. Here is a comic book movie that matters, both for its celebration of the material and the seriousness it offers its title character. There is much here that is dark and gloomy, but the movie earns it. Scared? Indeed, you should like him when he's angry. It's finally time for me to begin assembling for the Avengers. And while many people try to forget this installment of the franchise, and it was made before Marvel decided to make all the movies lead up to a big crossover movie event, it is generally considered that The Incredible Hulk is a sequel and not a reboot. So, By this theory, I decided to watch this version of the Hulk first to refresh my memory before heading into its sequel. On top of that, it's a great chance for me to once again become involved with the Lambi and their lamps in the director's chair. This time around, the director is Ang Lee, who at the time seemed like a very interesting choice to take on the Hulk. He had just come off of his acclaimed and popular Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and it was thought that he would bring a unique take on the Hulk, and he definitely did do that, even if it might not have been a good thing. I vaguely remember going to see this movie when it first came out. It was just a couple years after X-Men, and it was a part of the superhero movie boom at the time. I believe it had moderate appeal and success, and then as time went on, it got a huge internet backlash. I remember liking it at the time, and watching it again, it absolutely held my interest the entire way through, but a combination of all the hate I've read about the movie, along with the undeniable fact that a lot of choices made in this movie were completely wrong, and I just didn't enjoy it as much as I first did. I generally agreed with most of the complaints I remember hearing about this movie, except for one. I thought the CGI for the Hulk in this movie wasn't that bad. In fact, it was quite good. I remember that at the time it was held up as the height of CGI detail, and I thought it looked fantastic. The only time I had a problem with the CGI Hulk was during the leaping scenes. They just didn't give him enough inertia or momentum, and he just bounced unbelievably off the ground like he was a flea rather than a two-ton Hulk. One of the biggest problems I had with this movie was the pacing. It dragged on way too long without making any progress. Miss Roops. There was no reason that it should have taken 40 minutes before the Hulk made an appearance and fully halfway into the movie before the Hulk fought anything. Not only that, but throughout all that setup, hardly anything was really explained. It was just set up to be explained later. I don't understand how there can be an hour of setup and there is almost no explanation of what happened to Bruce or his parents. The second half of the movie fares a bit better, but it never really moved past a casual trot. The movie clocks in at over 2 hours, but I think it could have been a much better movie if it was cut down to about an hour and 45 minutes, if not shorter. Ang Lee had a unique concept that he wanted to use split screens in this movie to give it a feel like a comic book. In theory, it was a great idea and it had been used to great effect in the show 24. Unfortunately, in this movie, it was only used effectively in a couple scenes. In the rest of the scenes where it was used, it felt just like a gimmick rather than an effective storytelling tool. The last place that is needed to give a paneled effect is what felt like a 5 minute scene of Bruce Banner being transported across the desert. I doubt any comic book would have wasted the equivalent of 2 pages on that scene. There were a few scenes where I really appreciated the visual flair that didn't even use the paneled effect, like the scene where Bruce is looking at an old picture, which comes to life as it becomes the memory of when the picture was taken. There is also a great scene where the Hulk is falling from the sky and he has a dream of looking in the mirror and Bruce sees the Hulk. Moments like that were absolutely brilliant. They were just too few and too far between. The cast for this movie was kind of hit and miss. I'm a fan of Jennifer Connelly and I couldn't take my eyes off of her anytime she was on camera. I thought she played a great Betty Ross, and her father, General Ross, was played by the great Sam Elliott, who was one of the few things I loved in Ghost Rider, and he is just as good in this movie. From what little I know of the Hulk from the comic books, I know that General Ross is one of the Hulk's biggest adversaries, but in this movie, he is very sympathetic. Every one of his decisions in this movie is perfectly justifiable based on his character, his duties, and the love for his daughter, along with his near inability to show it. Unfortunately, I don't think Eric Bana was the best choice for Bruce Banner. Every time he got angry, he just looked like he was going to have a seizure or a stroke. And when he wasn't angry, he wasn't much of anything else at all. And finally, there's Nick Nolte as the completely mental David Banner, who goes from the verge of craziness to completely over the top crazy, all the while looking just like his famous mugshot photo. There are just a lot of bad decisions associated with this movie, and I came into it wanting to like it again, but I just couldn't get past all of the problems I kept seeing. I haven't even mentioned the fact that the Hulk fights a trio of mutated dogs, including a poodle. Not only that, but he kills them by smashing them to a green pulp right in front of Betty Ross. And that's the scene where she's supposed to feel sympathetic to him. Even if it's a mutant dog, I find it hard to find sympathy for a green monster that just smashed three dogs to death in front of me. And the climactic battle with his father is resolved when he gets really, really angry, feeding his anger energy to a giant jellyfish looking bubble that gets hit with a missile or bomb and evaporates into a green mist. I wish I were kidding. Thursday, I'll be taking a look at the much better sequel to this movie before I assemble the rest of the Avengers. Be sure to come back tomorrow as well when I try out a new weekly feature. Until next time, this has been Baba Wheat for Flights, Tides, and Movie Nights. Let's take a look at 2003's Hulk from a 2013 perspective and find out what summer movie audiences really seem to hate about it. When Ang Lee's film adaptation of the Marvel comic book series, The Incredible Hulk, was released in the summer of '03, audiences walked out very disappointed and practically called it a sad excuse for a summer blockbuster. What was the cause of the hate? What went wrong? Was it the numerous conversations within the characters? Isn't it important for characters in superhero movies to talk about their plight? Was it the dark, depressing storyline? I think we've grown used to that by now. What with the releases of Christopher Nolan's rebooted Batman films, for instance? Was it the poor rendering of a CGI Hulk running around and smashing things in his path? Well, fair enough, but haven't we seen worse CGI? And aren't we always aware that CGI is used in these movies? Granted, this Hulk looks more like Shrek on steroids, but he does interact with the real world very well. He smashes objects, encounters people, blends into shadows, etc. And in close ups, he doesn't even look fake. My guess is that Hulk was a superhero movie that was ahead of its time. Surely CGI would progress in these films, but in the years since this film's release, we've gotten used to action films of this type having many complex issues and dark material. See The Dark Knight, for example, with Spider Man and Daredevil, both films based on Marvel comic book characters already released before this one. People thought they were going to get just good, solid entertainment with hardly anything more. I don't think they were prepared for Hulk. But wait a minute, you may exclaim. What about Tim Burton's Batman films? Those came out more than 10 years before Hulk, and they were pretty dark for comic book movies. Well, since then, the superhero movie genre was declared dead, not only with the Shaq Vehicle Steel, the Pamela Anderson, Striptease, Barbed Wire, but even with Joel Schumacher's embarrassing Batman and Robin. Then X-Men was released in 2000, and it seemed like the superhero movie was back, high on entertainment, low on much else, but entertaining nonetheless. So audiences figured we'd get more and more of these as they went along, and it would take a more iconic figure like Batman, to make people ease into darkness. I wonder what would happen if those people watched Hulk again nowadays, because to get straight to the point, if you didn't figure it out already, I think Hulk is pretty good. It's inventive, it's involving and well executed. And more importantly, it's successful in its character development and even how it represents the green behemoth himself, the Hulk. How Ang Lee sees the Hulk is probably different from the comic book story. I admit never having read it, but all the more intriguing. Hulk is more of a tragic figure in this movie, a victim of unfortunate circumstances and consequences of a world he didn't make. He can't help but let out the rage in the physical form of a gigantic beast. The Hulk is the rage that comes from within Dr. Bruce Banner, Eric Bana, a scientist working on a complicated radioactive experiment. He works with his ex girlfriend, Betty Ross, Jennifer Connelly, whom he is still friendly with. Their experiment is still in the staging process, but things get even worse as a laboratory accident exposes Bruce to radiation. It doesn't kill him, but it does enhance something inside of him, which isn't clear until he transforms into the Hulk, a giant, green skinned monster with great strength and speed. He discovers he is able to transform when he is angry and can change back when his rage dwindles down. Bruce also learns that there's more to him than that as he gets in contact with an old man who turns out to be his father, David Banner, Nick Nolte. He knows of Bruce's ability and plight and has also passed it on to him to begin with by experimenting with his own DNA code and passing along transformed genes to his son. He then tried to kill him before being taken away for 30 years. Betty's father, General Ross, Sam Elliott, knows of David's history and keeps an untrusting eye on Bruce before realizing what he has become and takes him away. But that may turn out to be a mistake. So, while Bruce is locked up and experimented upon, he becomes the Hulk again and runs amok, leaving General Ross and his men to decide whether to kill him or help him. Remarkably, for a supposed summer blockbuster, Hulk is very somber in tone. There's some good action and some intriguing entertainment values, but for the most part, it's pretty dark. There's a tragic backstory involving David and what he may have attempted to do with Bruce to end his curse early, as well as the philosophy of who's human and who's not, which is something that any science fiction story likes to use. But more importantly, the characters talk about their situations at hand. They discuss their plight and how it's affecting them all. That's kind of refreshing. The film's audience in 2003 may have found the conversations too talky. So what? I felt for the protagonist even more because of that. Probably the strongest moment is when Bruce and Betty discuss this transformation alone in a cabin before Bruce is taken away. Bruce reveals that it scares him most when he realizes that he likes it, when he completely loses himself into being the Hulk. It's a revealing moment and it sets the mood for the rest of the movie, in that Betty knows how her father and the authorities will treat him and hopes to be able to soothe him. I don't even want to call Hulk a superhero movie. It's more of an incredible Hulk version of the classic monster movies such as Frankenstein, King Kong, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Elements of all three titles are evident here in a modern light. I think more of those titles than I do of Spider Man or Daredevil. With Frankenstein, we have the creation gone wrong, the belief that humanity will never accept the unusual, and the creature unfairly hunted by those who don't understand. That last one also resembles King Kong, in that Hulk is seen as a monster and hunted by the authorities. Also resembling King Kong are the action sequences in which Hulk fights off mutated dogs that were part of David Banner's genetics experiment. and an extended sequence in which Hulk battles army tanks and helicopters. Those scenes resemble Kong's battle with dinosaurs and his last stand. As for the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde aspects, it pretty much explains itself. Bruce is Jekyll, Hulk is Hyde, simple. I mentioned before that I didn't want to call Hulk a superhero movie, but I can't deny that it is a comic book movie. Ang Lee goes all out to give it the look of a comic book. He positions many shots to look like comic frames. He uses mobile camera movements to keep the flow of the mood, and more frequently, he uses multiple split screens that show one area or another while keeping in the same scene. Watch this movie and you'll see what I mean. It's very clever. Oh, and should I also mention that the credits are also in that Comic Sans font that is used in descriptions of comic books. As for the action, it's pretty good too. That lengthy sequence in which the Hulk battles the military is exciting and intense, and because of everything that's happened before, we always root for the Hulk to escape this situation. Acting is across the board solid. Eric Bana is great as Bruce, giving us a complicated character to like and root for. Jennifer Connelly is appealing as Betty, who is stronger than you might think in this girlfriend role. She's better than that. Sam Elliott is not entirely villainous as General Ross. He gives the character a more human side than you might expect. He's very stubborn, yes, but he's not evil. And then there's Nick Nolte, who is just perfect as David Banner. This is a mad scientist done right, not manic or campy in the slightest, just a deranged, self centered lunatic who cares more for how his experiment progressed with his son rather than rekindling a relationship with his son. Okay, now what about the Hulk himself? Yes, I know he's entirely CGI, and people have attacked this creation as looking very fake. It's easy to make fun of this Hulk, apparently, and I have to admit, it is the least interesting element in the movie. That might be because while in close up, it looks very real, and like I said, it interacts with the real world fine. But when you see it in faraway shots, it does look quite fake with herky jerky movements and a cartoon like look. But for the most part, I really like Hulk. I know I'm in a minority on this, but hopefully that will change if people actually give this a second look. When you really think about it, comic book movies have improved into being movies for people who don't like comic book movies, and thus making them like even more comic book movies, ironically. So, Hulk was one of the first to share that label, while other fans of the superhero movie genre were left disappointed by the heavy dramatic situations and the dark storyline. Times have changed. It's time to watch this movie again. Hopefully, you'll see it a different way.